Today we're going to smoke a brisket on the Masterbuilt XT. The Masterbuilt XT is a gravity fed smoker, which basically means the charcoal will burn down gradually whilst the fan system takes over and pumps the heat and the smoke into the main cooking chamber, slow cooking our food. It's a totally indirect apparatus, which means you have no access to that direct heat, which is great for low and slow cooking, but it can reach really high temperatures of up to 350 degrees Celsius. So if you did want to sear something, you could do that. I've picked this today because I basically want the temperature to be constant and not have to manage the fire myself. I've got other bits of equipment that I could use, like the Kamado Joe Big Joe 3. Again, that involves being pretty hands-on, kind of checking on it sporadically. Even though you stabilize it well, you can have to top it up, put more smoking wood in. This is just total simple smoking, so I can go about my day and get things ready for my smoking class, which is tomorrow. We're smoking a brisket, an Australian Wagyu brisket, and a Boston butt from Dingley Dell. Loads of intramuscular fat, really great pork, some of the best you can get in the UK. So let's get this thing up and running.
I've already topped this up with charcoal to the brim, and now it's going to be a simple case of just getting it lit. Our tumbleweed firelighter slots in here, and this is where the charcoal is sitting. We'll light the firelighter, and after about 5 minutes or so, the charcoal should be lit enough so the fan can take over. You need to get it to about 40 degrees Celsius before it will happen, and then we set the temperature, open the damper, and let the grill do the rest. While the grill comes up to temperature, I'm going to quickly sharpen my knife using the Hall knife sharpener. Magnetic block keeps the knife at the correct angle, and then you just run the sharpener up and down the knife, getting it sharp so we can trim the brisket perfectly.
Ready to prepare the meat now. Stainless steel table, really handy for events, demos, you name it. But this is my go-to trick to prepare. So I've got butcher's paper on a roll, which we pull out, and then got these, which were once upon a time Traeger hooks, but they're magnets. Get that down. So it won't blow away now. Now we're going on to the Australian Wagyu brisket. It's time to get it out of the packaging and trim it up, ready for the Masterbuilt. As with anything you prepare for low and slow cooking, it's all about taking off the hard fat that just won't render down. So this is a really nice brisket, Australian Wagyu, plenty of intramuscular fat and plenty of fat on the outside. But the problem is we're going to cook it low and slow. So we're going to go, 110 degrees Celsius. So some of this really hard fat just isn't going to render down. So we want to remove that, take it to one side, because otherwise what will happen is you'll just be left with like globs of unrendered hard fat, and it won't be very pleasant to eat. So I can feel this end, which is the flat. So when it comes to briskets, two muscles, the flat and the point, that gives that away. That bit that kind of juts up is the point, and the flat piece, obviously the flat. The flat tends to be the leaner of the two muscles, and the point, obviously the fattier. It's where you get your brisket burnt ends from, and your kind of nicer, thicker slices of brisket. But what we do is we'll start to take away some of this hard fat. I always like to run my hand over the surface, and you can kind of tell what's hard and what's soft enough to render away. So straight away, this piece here needs to come off, big hard clump. So we'll do that now, and then we'll get on to the seasoning.
This isn't trimmed in real time, but you get the point. You need to take off any hard fat that is on the surface. This will allow the seasoning to penetrate in and the smoke. You need to do both sides of the brisket as well. So bear in mind, you need to flip it over and check that underneath. Any silver skin, any hard fat, all need to be taken off. And that's why having a really sharp knife is super handy in this situation. It makes my job a lot easier.
That's our brisket trimmed. Some of the fat on the point I've left just because if I remove it, it will basically affect the structural integrity of the brisket. So this kind of like mohawky bit that sticks up is really kind of held on by just a few muscle fibers. If I start taking that fat away underneath, I'm worried this piece is going to come off. So I've left that on for now, but that's basically all that's been trimmed off it. Probably about 1 kilo of beef fat. Don't throw that away. We're going to render that down in a pan, so when it comes to the wrapping, we can put some beef dripping or tallow, for my American friends, over the brisket, just keeping it nice and moist while we see it through the end of the cook. But now we're going to go on to the seasoning of the brisket, and we're going to use my very own Cowboy Coffee Rub. Cowboy Coffee Rub, full of amazing flavours that go really well with beef. Chipotle, real coffee, cumin, chili, salt, pepper, you name it. Makes an amazing bark on beef. So we're going to use this now to season the brisket. We're not going to use a binder because the brisket is wet enough where the rub will actually stick to it. It's a nice warm day, so we'll use a liberal amount of this. I'm reckoning about probably 100 grams of seasoning for this brisket. It's about a 4 kilo brisket, 4 to 5. So we'll need a hefty amount of seasoning, but let's go.
It's always fun seasoning stuff outside on a windy day. That's why I've got my hand trying to protect the rub so we don't lose any. But it's really a case of just getting a liberal coating of seasoning all over the surfaces of the beef. I always make sure I season it enough so you pretty much can't see the surface of the meat, because you think this needs to flavour this whole lump. So you need to go extra heavy, because if you do it too light, you're not going to taste any of the seasoning on the actual meat. Don't forget the sides, and obviously flip it over and do the underneath of the brisket, because that's important too. You don't want a naked kind of bottom, pardon the pun. Lots of seasoning, yeah, about 100 grams for this piece, maybe even a little bit more.
Our brisket is now ready to get into the Masterbuilt and smoke. So we've set the grill to 205 degrees Celsius, which is about 100 degrees Celsius in Celsius. Yeah, I don't do Fahrenheit. Basically, I can't change the controller because it's too far away from the house to connect to the Bluetooth. So we're kind of having to go in Fahrenheit. So about 100 degrees Celsius, 105 degrees Celsius. And we're going to add in some hickory wood. Now there's two ways to do this. You can put it in the top of the hopper, so as it burns down, or you can put it in the ash basket, so as the debris falls down onto the wood, it's going to put some smoke into the chamber. So we're going to do both. We're going to put some in the top and a few pieces in the bottom. We've got a long smoke. We're going to get these in the chamber. We've got the brisket and the pulled pork. We'll get these in, and then we're going to close the lid for literally probably 4 hours before we even go back to it. So let's do that now. So hickory pieces.
I've got my trays of fat. One's the pork fat, one's the brisket fat. They're going to render down, and on go the brisket and the Boston butt. I've not talked much about the Boston butt, but that is going to be cooking alongside the brisket.
So it's coming up to 5:30 at night now. I'll put these on at 11:30 roughly. So a good 5 hours. I've checked them sporadically, but I didn't want to open the grill too much because obviously every time you check, you let the heat out. So what I'm looking for is a bark starting to develop and some of that fat starting to render down. Then we can think about either wrapping these in some butcher's paper or foil to help push through that cooking process, or just let them smoke slowly. So we'll have a little look now and we'll check the temperature. Come on in. Both probing low 60s. So really, I want to give them another half an hour really until they both kind of get to like 70 degrees Celsius. The bark is looking pretty nice. The fat cap on the pork is looking like it's rendering. It's becoming nice and soft. So we're just going to let these ride for another half an hour to an hour, and then we'll make a decision whether or not we wrap or not. The pork fat and the beef fat is starting to reduce down really nicely. I'll probably take that out now, just give that a little boost on the hob just to get that rendered down properly, because we're cooking at too low a temperature to really do that efficiently enough. It's been an hour since I last checked the meat. The brisket has formed a nice bark on the outside now, and I'm pretty confident it's in the stall. So the stall is when the meat is not increasing in temperature, and everyone's first instinct is to obviously crank the grill up to basically get it to push through this. But at the present, it will be losing moisture and not going up in temperature. So to combat that, you either have to let it do its thing, and it could be another 2-3 hours depending on the size of the brisket, or we can help push it along by wrapping it, which we are going to do. The pork is at 70 degrees Celsius. We will do the same with that. So I'm going to put the pork in a silver tray, use the fat I rendered out of the fat to make it liquid, and put that on top, and we'll do the same with the brisket. So we'll get that into some butcher's paper, we'll use a little bit of the tallow, and we'll get it back into the grill.
Very happy with the bark. Look at that, the coffee rub's giving us a lovely dark exterior, nice and crispy. And we're going to go in with this golden smoked beef dripping. This is going to allow the brisket to really become moist and tender, and it won't dry out in the last kind of phase. And then we're going to wrap it up using plenty of butcher's paper, and then get it back into the grill and see it through to the end.
The next day, this has been resting overnight pretty much, so my timings were totally off with this brisket, but that is the key to brisket, I think, is just troubleshooting the cook as you go. So it went on at about 11 in the morning, in the AM, and in my mind I kind of thought it would be done by at least early evening, 8-9 o'clock, basically because I was comparing it to like a British brisket. Obviously the Australian Wagyu so cooks very differently. It didn't actually finish cooking until 1:30 AM in the evening, so nearly a full 12 hours on. Once it came off, I let it cool down to around 65 degrees Celsius, and then I rested it in the Masterbuilt. Actually, I turned that down to 170 Fahrenheit or 75 degrees Celsius, and let it hang out there until I needed it. So with the next day now, 12 o'clock in the morning, we're going to slice into it, see how we've done. Looks really good, feels really bouncy, got a nice bit of jiggle to it, nice and soft, nice wiggles, got that nice like meaty slapping noise. So let's carve into it and see how we've done. Right, I'm going to go straight through the middle.
Let me just sit on these so you can talk about the bark.
Let's go straight through the centre and separate the flat and the point, and then we can get different slices. So look at the smoke ring on that, nice thick pencil width smoke ring, which is perfect. And then we'll see how supple this brisket is by bending it over our knife. Look at that, plenty soft. Really happy with that. And yeah, now it's just time to cut into the rest of it and see how we've done. So we're going to separate the point now. That was that bit that was hanging on by a thread, and this is the fattier side of the brisket. So look at that smoke ring, really impressed with that. The Masterbuilt has done a good job. Still got plenty of moisture in it, albeit a little bit cold, this brisket. The timings of it, as I mentioned, weren't brilliant, but it's still really soft, really tender. And this was that point bit.
Bon appetit.
Beautiful. And here's just an awesome bit of B-roll of some of the flat being sliced up. You can still see the juice, the moisture, the fat coming out of that brisket. Really tender, really juicy.
There we have it, our Australian Wagyu brisket. If I'm being super critical, probably could have come out of the rest a little bit earlier, more of a temperature thing than anything, but sliced like butter, basically was nice and bendy. Got an amazing smoke ring, as you saw as we cut into that point section. Beautiful. Very different to British brisket. I would say Australian Wagyu, you almost get like a gamey kind of taste to it. A little bit almost livery in flavour, if that makes sense. Quite rich. Whereas British brisket, obviously you don't get that kind of like fatty, fall apart quality. But yeah, really good. Very surprising how long it actually took to cook, but as I say, it's more about the troubleshooting during the process. I will write a little recap in the comments so you've got an idea of timelines in terms of the cook. But yeah, really happy, really gorgeous, and yeah, time to tuck into some brisket and let me know some good leftover brisket recipes. If you haven't done so already, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, give us a follow. See you soon.